Uh, Ezra chapter 5. Is that all right? Okay. So to kind of refresh our memory, um, the edict from the king was reiterated, and um, the prophet Haggai had sent a prophecy from God telling the Jews to get busy because they had taken a 16-year hiatus from building the temple. And so this message from Haggai that we read last week, yeah, we covered the entire book last week, John, while you were gone. We did the entire book of Haggai last week. Yeah, it's only 2 chapters. Yeah. Um, but once they got the word from Haggai to begin again, we see here in verse 2 of chapter 5, that's what they did. They got right back to work. Now, it did take some months to gather the, the materials again and gather or muster the people to come and rebuild. But essentially, after they received the message from Haggai, the work began in earnest. Now, that being said, it's going to still take about 3 or 4 years to finish the temple. But all that is going to be spelled out here in chapter 5 and, well, especially chapter 6. But understand, well, I'm jumping ahead. I shouldn't do that. So anyway, we'll start. We did cover verses 1 and 2 last week in chapter 5, but we'll just start there fresh and kind of reiterate what I have just said. So chapter 5, verse 1.
Then the prophets, Haggai the prophet, and Zechariah the son of Iddo, prophesied unto the Jews that were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel, even unto them. Then rose up Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua the son of Jozadak, and began to build the house of God which is at Jerusalem, and with them were the prophets of God helping them.
Now, just as a reminder, Zerubbabel was kind of he is of the tribe of Judah. If Israel was to have, or Judah was to have a rightful king at this time, it would be Zerubbabel. But the Judean kingship at this point, and I don't think ever regained traction after, who was the last king? And the name escapes me. Anyway, had there been a king, Zerubbabel would be it. That being said, he is kind of like the leader. He's the general foreman, I guess you could say, of this tabernacle rebuilding. And then Joshua here, he is the high priest. So he is the head Levite, and he is the high priest. And so the sacrifices and the work, and the priestly work that would go on would be carried out by him. So these are the two main characters, the main bosses, you could say, in this rebuilding project. So that verse 2, it does say that they began again to build the house of the Lord. But let's read verse 3 here. Something comes up.
At the same time came to them Tatnai, governor on this side the river, and Shethar-boznai and their companions, and said thus unto them, Who hath commanded you to build this house, and to make up this wall? Then said we unto them after this manner, What are the names of the men that make this building?
So we see Tatnai here. He's the governor, so he would be appointed by the king of Persia to be the governor or the overseer of the region on the west side of the Euphrates River. So he has some clout, and he has been appointed by the king to be the governor of this area. So he happens to come up on this scene of Zerubbabel and Joshua and these others rebuilding this temple, and he asks the question, who's commanded you to rebuild this? What has given you the authority in which to rebuild this temple? Now, verse 4 is a little confusing, but verse 4 is Tatnai asking Zerubbabel and Joshua the names of the people involved. So it is a little confusing the way that it is written here, but the we of verse 4 is Tatnai and his sidekick there, Shethar-boznai, however you pronounce that. Okay? So he asks, what are the names of the men that build this building? So we have a little bit of seemingly opposition here. Remember in chapter 3, we had the Samaritans causing all kinds of trouble, and the opposition from the Samaritans kept the building from going on for 16 years. But we see Tatnai here. Now, his motive is not in malice at all, which we will see here in just a moment. Continuing on here in verse 5.
But the eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, that they could not cause them to cease, till the matter came to Darius. And then they returned answer by letter concerning this matter.
Notice verse 5. The eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, that they could not cease. So the work continued on, even in spite of this questioning from Tatnai. Now, Tatnai, as we're going to read through here, he's going to send a letter to King Darius, and get confirmation that Zerubbabel and his men do have permission from the king in order to continue this building project. So we're going to read this letter that Tatnai sends to Darius in verse 6.
A copy of the letter that Tatnai, governor of this side the river, and Shethar-Boznai and his companions, the Aspharsachites, which were on this side the river, sent unto Darius the king. They sent a letter unto him, wherein was written thus: Unto Darius the king, all peace. Be it known unto the king, that we went into the province of Judea, to the house of the great God, which is builded with great stones, and timbers laid in the walls, and this work goeth fast on, and prospereth in their hands.
So the opening of the letter, there's no malice here. Tatnai says, we went to Judea, we saw this work going on. Notice what it says there. The work goes fast and prospers in their hands. Because you remember what we just read in verse 5, the eye of their God was upon them. And again, reiterated in the book of Haggai, God told them to get busy and start building this building. And God had told them that he would be with them and that he would bless their work. So now that the work is going on and we have this letter from Tatnai, the work progresses quickly and is prospering. It's blessed by God, which is what God had promised them in the book of Haggai. God had promised them that this would be a blessed work. Verse 9, this is still the letter that we're sending to King Darius.
Then asked we those elders, and said unto them thus: Who commanded you to build this house, and to make up these walls? We asked their names also, to certify thee, that we might write the names of the men that were the chief of them. And thus they returned us answer, saying, We are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and build the house that was builded these many years ago, which a great king of Israel builded and set up. But after that our fathers had provoked the God of heaven unto wrath, he gave them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon the Chaldean, who destroyed this house, and carried the people away into Babylon. For in the first year of Cyrus the king of Babylon, the same King Cyrus made a decree to build this house of God, and the vessels also of gold and silver of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took out of the temple that was in Jerusalem, and brought them into the temple of Babylon. Those did Cyrus the king take out of the temple of Babylon, and they were delivered unto one whose name was Sheshbazzar, whom he had made governor, and said unto him, Take these vessels, go, carry them into the temple that is in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be builded in his place. Then came the same Sheshbazzar, and laid the foundation of the house of God which is in Jerusalem, and since that time, even until now, hath it been in building, and yet it is not finished. Now therefore, if it seem good to the king, let there be search made in the king's treasure house, which is there at Babylon, whether it be so that a decree was made of Cyrus the king to build this house of God at Jerusalem, and let the king send his pleasure to us concerning this matter.
So what we just read here was the letter Tatnai sent to Darius the governor, or the king, wanting confirmation that this building has been approved by the king. No, I want to go back here to verse, where is it? Verse 10, Tatnai says, We asked them their names to certify thee. So we wanted to know the list of the names of the people involved here. And this is what, beginning in verse 11, this is an answer that Zerubbabel would have given to Tatnai, and then Tatnai has included this correspondence with Zerubbabel in this letter to Darius. And it begins in verse 11, We are the servants of the God of heaven. Now remember, in those days, with those pagans, there were many gods, little g gods. And Zerubbabel here is emphasizing the fact that this is a building for the God of heaven. Notice the big G there. This is just not any God. This is the God. And it says that they're rebuilding this house that was builded these many years ago, which the great king of Israel builded and set up. This is talking about Solomon. Solomon, we all know that Solomon built the first temple. We've talked about that at length. It was destroyed by the Babylonians, and now they're back rebuilding it. But this temple was standing prior to Tatnai ever showing up or even being born. And he says, we are rebuilding this. But notice verse 12. Zerubbabel and these men admit their errors of their forefathers. But after our fathers had provoked the God of heaven into wrath, he gave them to the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. We know that. This is what we've been studying at length since we began the book of Daniel. We know that the people of Judah turned their backs on God. And God said that you're going to be in captivity to the Babylonians for 70 years, which they were, and this is where we're at now. But Zerubbabel is reiterating the fact that what has happened in Jewish history and has brought us to this point of rebuilding the temple. Going on there in verse 13. But in the first year of Cyrus, the king, he made a decree that we go back and build the house of God. And that was all, again, by the providence of God that this happens. This was all set up and planned by God before the foundation of the world. But what the people are reiterating to Tatnai is that in the first year of Cyrus, an edict was given that we were to go back and rebuild this. Now, again, at this point, there's been some 16, 17 years have went by, perhaps a little bit more than that. But this is why we're out here building. And then it goes on to list in verse 14 and 15, the vessels of gold and silver that Nebuchadnezzar confiscated and brought back to Babylon was then given back to the Jews to take back to Babylon, or to take back to Jerusalem, to put back into service in the temple. And that's listed there in verse 14 and 15. And then it says, continues on, that this building is still going on. And it says in verse 17, check the records in Babylon and make sure this is a legit building project. So that's where we leave off in chapter 5, is Tatnai wanting confirmation from the king that this is a legitimate government-sanctioned project. Understand, and we haven't talked about this in this chapter, but the king was providing all the materials and all the money and all the treasure that was needed to rebuild this temple. So that's why, in some ways, this government official Tatnai was curious as to what was actually going on here, because the government, in some way, was paying for and providing the materials for this rebuilding. Everybody okay with all that? That was quick. That was 13 minutes. We're going to get done way early. No, we're not. Anyway. So, notice I want to bring this out before we start chapter 6. In verse 17, Tatnai says, let there be a search made in the king's treasure house, which is there at Babylon, whether it be so. So keep that in mind as we read chapter 6. But the records that the Babylonians and the Medes and Persians kept were meticulous. So Tatnai says, hey, go back and check the records. And, have anybody ever been to the courthouse and had to look up something? And, I mean, just rows and rows and rows and rows and boxes and stacks everywhere of all these things that has taken place in the history of the county. Lawsuits and criminal activity and land all this stuff, is not always on hard drives and computers. It's papers everywhere. Kind of getting off topic there, but just... So Tatnai says, hey, go back and check. And, of course, this would have been, 3,000 years ago. They probably only had 5 Not like today, where you got years and years and years, but you get the point here. But Tatnai says, go back and check. So, chapter 6 now is the king's answer to Tatnai's request. All right, and that's what we got here in chapter 6. Starting,
Ezra 6. Then Darius the king made a decree, and search was made in the house of the rolls where the treasures were laid up in Babylon.
So Darius gets the letter and begins the process of looking through the records to find it. I like what it says there, in Babylon. Now, notice what I thought this was funny this week. Now, you may not, the humor may be lost on you, but notice verse 2.
And there was found at Achmetha, in the palace that is in the province of the Medes, a roll, and therein was a record thus written.
So it wasn't at Babylon. It was at a city called Achmetha. And it's just funny to me. I can picture, I don't know, 2 or 3 people being sent to Babylon by the king to look at all these records, and they go through every stack and pile, and it's not even there. It's in another town. But this Achmetha was a summer retreat that the kings would go to, kind of like Camp David. I kind of likened it to that. And but it's just funny that that's where the record was. Now understand, this is all by God's hand, because what made them decide to go and look at Achmetha instead of saying, while they're at Babylon, well, we can't find it anywhere? Understand the hand of God in this. And again, this is kind of a humorous point here, but this is the hand of God. That these people of these Persian officials didn't just quit because they couldn't find this record at Babylon. And according to what I'm understanding, this was their edict. This was their command to go to Babylon and look for the records. But they didn't just go to Babylon. They continued looking till they could find it. Now, perhaps, in some ways, some of the people that were looking for it probably thought, I remember Cyrus giving this, so I know it's here somewhere. So perhaps that's what led them to Achmetha. But in the grand picture, we all know that this was the hand of God that sent them there to look for this record. And they found it. In verse 2, they found it. It's what it says. And here's what it says in verse 3 is what this says.
In the first year of Cyrus the king, the same Cyrus the king made a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem, that the house be builded, the place where they offered sacrifices, and that the foundations thereof be strongly laid, the height thereof 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 60 cubits, with 3 rows of great stones, and a row of new timber, and let the expenses be given out of the king's house.
Do we catch what we say here? The edict read, verse 3, let the house be builded, the place where they offered sacrifices. So go back to the original place. Don't compromise and build it somewhere else. Rebuild it on this particular place where the sacrifices have been made. Let the foundations thereof be strongly laid, so don't skimp on the project. And he gives the size that the breadth is and the height be 3 cubits or 90 feet. Now, this was this measurement was larger than Solomon's measurements of his temple, but some believe that this command of 90 feet or 60 cubits was because since Cyrus was paying for it, or the government, that he wanted to put a limit on how large they would build it, because they were since Cyrus was providing the funds and the materials, Cyrus wanted to have some control as to how large it would be. But notice, Cyrus was very generous in allowing it to be built bigger than Solomon's temple. Now, quite frankly, as I sit here right now, I don't know what size they did actually build it, because I do think that this 90 feet size was a guideline, but I can't. If someone was to ask me what size this rebuilt temple was, I don't have those numbers. But understand that this command from the king was 90 feet, and again, many commentators believe that was because since he was providing the materials and the money, he wanted to set a limit on what they could do. Okay. And it says there, build it with 3 rows of great stones and rows of new timber, and let the expenses be given out of the king's house. Do you understand the blessing this is? That the king himself is the one that is providing the material. Now, again, we all understand how taxes work. I mean, so It's not the king himself personally, but we understand how taxes work. And that the whole of the Persian Empire essentially was paying into the rebuilding fund of this project. This is a big deal because the Jews certainly didn't have anything. The only thing they had essentially was what they carried from Babylon back to Jerusalem, which wasn't much, but the king gave them what they needed and provided what they needed later on. Verse 5, continuing with this same thought here.
And also let the golden and silver vessels of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took forth out of the temple which is at Jerusalem, and brought unto Babylon, be restored, and brought again unto the temple which is at Jerusalem, every one to his place, and place them in the house of God.
So all of these furnishings that Nebuchadnezzar took was given back to him to place back into service, not to place in some closet somewhere, not to put them in some museum to show off, not to give them out to people as tokens, but to put them back into the service of the Lord at the tabernacle, or at the temple. Thank you. Yeah. What I was going to say tabernacle, wasn't I? Anyway, that was in Moses' time. Anyway, but no, again, understand, the king decreed all this. This wasn't just some random thought that Zerubbabel had, hey, let's just take all this and go back. They had the blessing of the king on all this. So verse 6 continues the same thoughts here.
Now therefore Tatnai, governor beyond the river, Shethar-Boznai, and your companions the Apharsachites, which are beyond the river, be ye far from thence. Let the work of this house of God alone, let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews build this house of God in his place.
So he tells Tatnai and the others, leave him alone. Let him do the work. Let the elders of the Jews build this house of God in his place. A pagan king blessing the Jews, providing their materials, providing all the needed funds to rebuild their temple. Now we will see a kind of a, well, I'm jumping ahead. I don't want to jump ahead. Verse 8. Here's something else.
Moreover, I make a decree what ye shall do to the elders of these Jews for the building of this house of God, that of the king's goods, even of the tribute beyond the river, forthwith expenses be given unto these men, that they be not hindered.
Notice, expenses be given to these men, that they be not hindered. They got the full support of the king on this. It's amazing. Notice what else. This is just unbelievable. Verse 9.
And that which they have need of, both young bullocks and rams and lambs, for the burnt offerings of the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, and oil, according to the appointment of the priests which are at Jerusalem, let it be given them day by day without fail.
So not only are they just supposed to allow them to continue building without hindrance, give them what they need for their sacrifices. Give them what they need, regardless of what it is. Young bullocks, rams, lambs, for the burnt offerings. Wheat, salt, wine, oil, give them what they need. Not just money, and not just to leave them alone, provide what they need. Notice what it says there in verse 9. Let it be given them day by day without fail. Now, there is an underlying motive to some of this, which we're going to read here in verse 10. But can we see the hand of God on the Jews here? The Lord's blessing the work. And I believe that even today, how does this apply to us today? The Lord will bless our work done for him. Now, we may not see it tangibly at times, but the work we do for the Lord will be blessed by the Lord. If, in fact, it is sanctioned by the Lord. Let's not get our priorities mixed up. If we're actually doing it for the Lord, in the name of the Lord will bless it. And we see here this pagan king allowing all this stuff to happen for God's people. But again, here's verse 10 is the underlying point to some of this. Verse 10.
That they may offer sacrifices of sweet savors unto the God of heaven, and pray for the life of the king and of his sons.
So he wants to be prayed for. He wants to, from the Jews' point of view, or no, from his point of view, he wants the Jews to pray for him, to sacrifice for him, to ask for blessings for his family. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I may have said the underlying motive, but that, maybe that seems a little selfish. That might not be the right way of saying that. But Cyrus is doing this so that they will pray for him and his family. Now, again, does this mean that Cyrus was a saved man and loved the Lord God? No, not necessarily. But he also understood that the Jews' God was the God that can make things happen, so to speak. And hey, if I can do something to get some good favor with the Jews' God, all the better, right? And people play that today. Well, I'll do this good thing to get on God's good side, The motives are all wrong, The principles may be right as far as, but the motive isn't necessarily devotion to God as much as it is what can I get for this. Regardless, the Lord used this to the benefit of the Jews and the rebuilding of the house. We're doing all right so far? I haven't stopped. Everybody, you all right down there, Terry? Okay.
It's King Darius, not Cyrus, right?
Well, Cyrus was the one that made the original decree, but Darius is the king that is writing this letter. Yeah. Now, verse 11, it kind of twists here just a little bit, 11 and 12.
Also I have made a decree, that whosoever shall alter this word, let timber be pulled down from his house, and being set up, let him be hanged thereon, and let his house be made a dunghill for this.
Yeah.
And the God that hath caused his name to dwell there, destroy all kings and people that shall put to their hand to alter and to destroy this house of God which is at Jerusalem. I, Darius, have made a decree, let it be done with speed.
So, verse 11. I've made a decree. This is Darius here. Easy for me to say. 3, 2, 1. Whosoever shall alter this word, let timber be pulled down from his house, and essentially make a gallows of it and hang him from it. That's pretty harsh. When the king made a decree, you better follow it. If you don't, you're going to have your house tore down. That's going to build a gallows from the material, and they're going to hang you from it. And let his house be made a dunghill for this. We need to bring back that. Your house be a dunghill. Can we get that going around here? Anyway.
Whatever you want.
Yeah. Notice number 12, or verse 12 here. And number 12. The God that has caused his name to dwell there, destroy all kings and people that shall put their hand to alter and to destroy this house of God which is at Jerusalem. I want to read something out of this book here. Not only was there provision for the execution of the person who destroyed or disobeyed this edict, but in addition, his house was to be made a dunghill. Beyond these stipulations, Darius called on God himself to destroy anyone, either ruler or private individual, who should in the future put to their hand to alter and to destroy this house of God, which is at Jerusalem. So a blessing, so to speak, was given over this house of God by Darius. That anybody that would alter or destroy this place, they would be destroyed. Now, let's think about this. It has been observed that this curse was fulfilled in 3 instances. Antiochus Epiphanes, who we talked about at great length in the book of Daniel, beginning in chapter 7 or 9, desecrated the temple during the Maccabean period, and Herod the Great altered it with a view to glorifying himself. Both of these men were smitten by a sudden awful disease and perished in great agony. So there's 2 times. Antiochus Epiphanes was destroyed, and Herod the Great was destroyed. Later, the temple was destroyed by the Romans in AD 70, and later, their own entire empire came to destruction. So we have 3 desecrations of the temple, or destructions of the temple, and 3 times this edict was carried out essentially by the Lord that these people were destroyed. And then we believe at a future time, the Lord will destroy all those who have been enemies against his house and against his people. So while this edict was from a pagan king, the Lord has, in some ways, you can say, done just what this king commanded to be done. Now, again, God didn't do it because Darius said to. Don't misunderstand. But Darius said it, but it did happen. Do we understand this? And it says there, I, Darius, verse 12, have made a decree, let it be done with speed. Comments or questions? We doing all right? All right. We're going to fast forward about 3 or 4 years. All right? A lot happens between verses 12 and verse 13. And you ain't seen nothing yet between verses 22 and chapter 7, but we'll get to that in a moment. Verse 13. Again, we're fast forwarding here.
Then Tatnai, governor on this side of the river, Shethar-boznai, and their companions, according to that which Darius the king had sent, so they did speedily. And the elders of the Jews builded, and they prospered through the prophesying of Haggai the prophet, and Zechariah the son of Iddo. And they builded, and finished it, according to the commandment of the God of Israel, and according to the commandment of Cyrus and Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia.
Notice, they let them work, they built it, they prospered, and it was completed. Now, I did notice something through this, and I don't know if you guys have caught this, but last week, if you remember, he pronounced Haggai. Remember that? You may not remember that, but now he's pronouncing it like I do, Haggai. And Darius, in the book of Daniel, chapter 5, he calls him Darius, but here he's calling him Darius. So it just kind of, I don't know how long it took for him to record all this, but at some point, the pronunciation, yeah, he got it right. He got it the way people in Illinois talk.
So that's not something, that God just changed their name?
No, it's spelled the same. Yeah, it's spelled the same here in this verse and in the book of Haggai and the book of Daniel. They're all spelled alike. So I could see, if the spelling was different, you'd pronounce it perhaps different. But I was listening to this week, and I'm like, he said Darius. I'm like, I think he was saying Darius in Daniel. So I went back and listened. And it's like, oh yeah. So anyway, now the house is done. Verse 15.
And this house was finished on the 3rd day of the month Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king.
So that would have been, according to experts, March 12th, 515 BC is when this second temple was completed. Okay? The edict was given in 538 BC that they go back and start rebuilding. They began rebuilding in 517 or 516. I did say 3 or 4 years. I'm sorry, but it was just a year or two after they began rebuilding. The temple was completed March 12th, 515 BC. Now, we're going to have a party. Remember, in chapter 3, we had a dedication. Let's see here. Yeah, in chapter 3, when the foundation was set. But now the whole temple is set. The whole temple is finished. Now we're going to have another celebration, and this is the dedication beginning in verse 16.
And the children of Israel, the priests and the Levites, and the rest of the children of the captivity kept the dedication of this house of God with joy, and offered at the dedication of this house of God 100 bullocks, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and for a sin offering for all Israel 12 he-goats, according to the number of the tribes of Israel. And they set the priests in their divisions, and the Levites in their courses, for the service of God, which is at Jerusalem, as it is written in the book of Moses.
So they offer all these animals. It says there 100 bullocks, 200 rams, 400 lambs, and for a sin offering for all of Israel, not just for Judah, but for all Israel, all 12 tribes, they offered a goat, one for each of the tribes. Now, this pales immensely in comparison to the amount of sacrifices that was offered when Solomon dedicated his temple in 1 Kings chapter 8. I'm going to read this because I couldn't remember. This is in 1 Kings chapter 8. It does kind of give what Solomon offered here. Solomon sacrificed some 142,000 animals at his dedication of his temple. Can you imagine?
A lot of blood.
Yeah. That's a lot of blood. Understand, the sacrifices of these animals was admitting and showing God that we understand and we believe that all of these materials, all of these animals were provided to us by you, by your blessing and providence. And it's not any different than us giving money to the house of God today. We recognize that by us giving money, we are acknowledging that God has given us these blessings and that we then return a portion of what he's given to us back to him. So while we may think 142,000 animals dedicated at one ceremony was a lot, if you consider all of Jerusalem or all of Israel, yes, it's a lot. Don't misunderstand, but think about the population and the people and the riches that Solomon had and Israel had at this time. I mean, Israel was at their peak at this time here in 1 Kings chapter 8. Now, by comparison, at this dedication, 712 animals were given. But understand a few things here. The Jews at this point, Israel at this point, gave what they had. They had just come back from being in captivity. They had just come back, and it had been perhaps 20 years. They didn't have 400 years of prosperity like Solomon did. You know, they didn't have a population of 400 years like Solomon did. So the scale of the people, the number of people, and the riches that these people had at this time paled in comparison to the riches and the people that Solomon had. So I believe, yes, there's a great disparity between 142,000 and 712, but perhaps comparing what Solomon had to what these folks had, it may have been a good comparison. It may have been equal. And it's just because somebody puts in $700 in the offering and some person puts in 70 and some person puts in 7, as long as they're giving it out of their abundance and what God has given and blessed them with, there's no difference. And I think it's this way here. But I want us to understand the difference between Solomon's kingdom and this kingdom of Zerubbabel, for lack of a better description. And they gave willingly. They gave what they had. And then it says there in verse 18, they set the priests in their divisions, so they put all the priests to work. Gave them jobs to do and shift schedules. And this is, all the requirements that priests were to do. They began doing them here as outlined in the book of Moses. In other words, the book of Numbers kind of outlines what the priests were to do. And so they're put to work here. We'll finish here and then I got a couple closing things and we'll be done. Verse 19, we'll finish chapter 6.
And the children of the captivity kept the Passover upon the 14th day of the first month. For the priests and the Levites were purified together, all of them were pure, and killed the Passover for all the children of the captivity, and for their brethren the priests, and for themselves. And the children of Israel, which were come again out of captivity, and all such as had separated themselves unto them from the filthiness of the heathen of the land, to seek the Lord God of Israel, did eat.
Now, I will mention, verse 21, we tend to think that the only people here at this point would have been people from the tribe of Judah and people from the tribe of Levi. But understand, in this Babylonian captivity, while that was mainly Judah and Benjamin that went to Babylon, there was a mixed group of people from the other tribes that went to Babylon with the captivity. And so these people have come back. Also, there are some Gentile people in here that have separated themselves from the filthiness of the heathens of the land. So there are some Gentiles mixed in this group that have turned from their wicked pagan gods to the God of Israel. And they are now included in this group that is holding this or is celebrating this Passover feast because they have turned from pagan gods to the God of Israel. So this is what we would call a mixed gathering of people, but all devoted to the God of Israel, or our God. I want us to understand that. Keep in mind, when they laid the foundation way back 20-some years ago, they celebrated the Passover then, but apparently it had been set aside while the rebuilding was not taking place, and here they again begin to celebrate the Passover. And they ate, verse 21. Verse 22.
And kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy. For the Lord had made them joyful, and turned the heart of the king of Assyria unto them, to strengthen their hands in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel.
Their work, this whole building project, and this whole work was blessed by the king, which is called Assyria here. That was just a general term for the king of the area. But the whole work was blessed by a pagan king. So God will use pagans for his glory, just like he uses people that are saved, people that trust him. But this is the climax here. They were strengthened in their hand for the work of the house of God. They're at the peak because we're going to see they're going to again begin to slowly turn away from God, as we will see through the rest of the book of Ezra. But understand, this is the peak right now of where they have been for some 70, 100 years. Comments, questions?